What if the world's most famous royal children aren't who we've been told they are? That's not the sort of question you expect to hear when talking about the carefully polished image of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Yet here we are, staring down rumors, leaks, and whispers that threaten to unravel everything the Sussexes have built their brand upon. Think about it. Birth certificates that don't match up with Meghan's public timeline. Hospital records that raise more questions than they answer. Attending doctors whose names never appear on the paperwork. How is that even possible? And why now, after years of speculation, do these inconsistencies seem to matter more than ever? Let's step back for a moment. Meghan and Harry carefully crafted a story of love, independence, and breaking free from tradition. They presented themselves as rebels against the monarchy, the couple willing to speak truth to power. But at the heart of every story lies a core detail that either holds everything together or makes it all collapse. That detail, in this case, comes down to something as ordinary, as human, as birth. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, two innocent children who, by the very fact of their existence, stand at the center of royal succession debates, identity questions, and now, credibility scandals. If the records surrounding their births are inconsistent, then the question becomes unavoidable. What else has been fabricated? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Consider how carefully royal births are usually handled. Diana stepped outside the Lindo wing doors with William in her arms, smiling, exhausted, but undeniably present. Kate Middleton repeated the ritual with each of her children, following tradition down to the choice of hospital and the parade of photographers. The nation trusted those moments because they were visible, documented, tangible. Meghan, however, took a different path. She refused the Lindo wing photos. She changed hospital plans. She guarded information with unusual intensity. Some saw this as privacy, others saw it as secrecy. But secrecy has a price, and when leaks begin to trickle out, they can quickly become floods. Now, let's imagine what this feels like for Harry. A man whose own life has been shadowed by whispers that Charles isn't his real father. Decades of tabloids pointing to James Hewitt's red hair, suggesting scandal where perhaps there was none. Can you picture the psychological toll? And now, fast forward. Harry is a father, desperate to protect his children from the same storm of rumors. Yet the very strategy of concealment may have made those whispers louder. Do you see the tragic irony? By trying to shield his children, he may have amplified the doubt surrounding them. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Hospital records aren't just paperwork, they're legal documents. They're supposed to be airtight. Birth certificates don't leave room for ambiguity. And yet, when you place Meghan's public statements side by side with the official dates, details begin to clash. She announced one timeline. The hospital records show another. The attending doctors listed, or not listed, don't align with standard protocol. If you or I spotted such discrepancies in a friend's story, we'd raise an eyebrow. But when it's the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, every eyebrow in the world is raised. Now ask yourself, why would any hospital release such records? Why now? Could it be pressure from inside the institution, tired of secrecy? Could it be whistleblowers who felt truth mattered more than privacy? Or was it something more insidious, an orchestrated leak designed to destabilize Meghan and Harry at a time when their influence is growing outside the monarchy? Each possibility adds layers to the drama. And whichever is true, one fact remains. The documents are out there, and they don't match Meghan's timeline. Think of the ripple effect. The media, always hungry for royal drama, latches onto the inconsistencies like sharks smelling blood in the water. Social media explodes. Hashtags trend. Commentators debate. And through it all, Harry and Meghan are silent, or worse, defensive. Their silence becomes the story. Their panic becomes visible in every move they make. Doesn't that silence tell its own tale? But let's not forget the emotional undercurrent. Behind the documents, behind the headlines, there are two children. Archie and Lilibet didn't choose this. They didn't ask to be symbols of truth versus deception. And yet, because of who their parents are, they're at the center of a storm that could shape how history remembers them. It's a cruel reality. When your parents live in the public eye, your identity is no longer your own. And when that identity is questioned, it's not just a personal wound, it's a global controversy. Now imagine the setting inside the palace and beyond. Officials scrambling, aides whispering, lawyers preparing statements. Meghan, always image-conscious, calculating the damage. Harry, emotionally raw, furious that once again his family is a target. And outside those walls, the press waits, gleeful, ready to pounce on every contradiction. The stakes couldn't be higher. Reputation, trust, legacy, all hanging by the thread of a few inconsistent documents. Here's where it becomes almost cinematic. Picture the Sussexes scrolling through headlines in Montecito, each new leak tightening the knot of panic. Picture royal aides in London smirking quietly, some perhaps even relieved that Harry and Meghan's rebellion is being undermined by their own secrecy. Picture the public, torn between sympathy and suspicion, wondering if they've been misled from the start. Drama, betrayal, irony. It's all there. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because the first inconsistency isn't what you'd expect. It's not in the obvious dates. It's not in the names. It's buried, almost hidden, in Meghan's carefully staged timeline. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's the thread that, when pulled, begins to unravel the entire fabric of the Sussex narrative. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a timeline doesn't line up? That's the question we have to ask when we take Meghan Markle's carefully curated pregnancy announcements and put them side by side with what the hospital records now reveal. Because a timeline isn't just dates on a calendar. It's a story, a sequence, a thread meant to convince the public that events unfolded naturally. And when that story starts to fray, people begin to question not just the dates, but the very truth behind them. Can a public figure survive when their timeline doesn't match the evidence? Or is that the point where trust is lost forever? Let's start at the beginning. Meghan and Harry announced Meghan's first pregnancy in October 2018 during their royal tour of Australia. The world was ecstatic. Headlines declared it the royal baby news we've been waiting for. The timing felt almost cinematic, just months after their wedding, as if the fairy tale were unfolding exactly on cue. But then came the first red flag. Doctors typically advise caution in announcing a pregnancy too early. Meghan and Harry said she was about 12 weeks along. Yet when Archie was born on May 6, 2019, the math didn't seem to add up neatly. The dates stretched, bent, and twisted. Was Archie born early? Was the pregnancy announced prematurely? Or was something else happening entirely? Now, here's where it gets curious. Meghan's appearances in late 2018 and early 2019 sparked endless speculation. Some observers noticed that her baby bump seemed to change shape dramatically from one day to the next. In some photos, she looked heavily pregnant. In others, barely at all. The tabloids feasted on this inconsistency. Supporters called it cruel body shaming. Critics whispered about prosthetics, moon bumps, and staged optics. But those whispers grew louder when the timeline of her public bump didn't align with the official due date. Have you ever noticed how, when someone tells a story that doesn't match reality, little details start to betray them? That's what happened here. Let's break down the sequence. Meghan's baby shower in New York happened in February 2019, with headlines suggesting she was about 7 months pregnant. That would make sense if Archie were born in April. But he arrived in May, which means either Meghan was further along than she admitted, or she wasn't carrying him at all. And when you cross-reference this with the hospital release documents, the picture becomes even murkier. The records don't confirm the attending physicians usually present for a royal birth. The dates don't align perfectly with what Meghan herself told the press. How does a story so carefully told leave behind so many jagged edges? Then there's the matter of secrecy. Unlike Kate Middleton, who appeared outside the hospital within hours of giving birth, Meghan chose a far more private route. The palace announced she had gone into labor hours after she had already given birth. That's not a small mistake. It's a major contradiction in the timeline. Why the delay? Why not announce it truthfully, in real time? Was it a matter of control, or was there something happening behind the scenes that couldn't be revealed immediately? Think about it. When people alter timelines, it's rarely by accident. It's because there's something they're trying to hide. And the timeline discrepancies didn't end with Archie. When Lilibet Diana was born in June 2021, the announcement carried similar ambiguities. Meghan and Harry declared the baby was delivered in Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. But local records revealed strange inconsistencies in the delivery details. Again, No clear attending physician was documented in the way you'd expect. And again, the dates seemed to clash subtly with Meghan's previous public appearances. Why? Once more, did the timeline feel off? Could it really be coincidence? Twice? Ask yourself this. If you were crafting a story, how careful would you be with the dates? How precise would you want your timeline to appear? And if you were caught in inconsistencies, wouldn't you rush to clarify them? Meghan and Harry didn't clarify. Instead, they doubled down, pushing back against rumors while refusing to address the oddities directly. That silence only fueled suspicion. Because when facts are missing, speculation fills the void. And speculation is a wildfire once it catches flame. Let's not overlook the psychology of it. Meghan has always been meticulous about image. She understands the media machine better than most. So why would she allow her pregnancy timelines to look so contradictory? Was it carelessness? Was it arrogance, believing no one would dare challenge her? Or was it necessity, an attempt to paper over realities that didn't fit the narrative? Each possibility says something different about her, and each leaves a lingering question. What was she so desperate to protect? But here's where the story twists again. When the birth certificates finally surfaced, they didn't just show mismatched dates. They revealed details that contradicted Meghan's public story entirely. The official paperwork listed one timeline. Meghan told another. And when you place them side by side, you can see the cracks as clearly as if someone had taken a marker and circled them. It's the sort of contradiction that might seem small in isolation, but together they form a pattern. A pattern that suggests the narrative wasn't just messy, it may have been constructed. And think about Harry in this equation. A man so scarred by years of rumors about his own paternity, now watching as his children's timelines are questioned. That's more than irony, it's tragedy. For him, every inconsistency in Meghan's story isn't just a PR problem. It's a personal nightmare. Because he knows how it feels to live under the shadow of doubt. And now his children may carry that same burden. Can you imagine the weight of that? The guilt? The fear? This is why the timeline matters. It isn't just about dates on paper. It's about trust. It's about credibility. It's about whether Meghan and Harry can stand before the world and say, "This is the truth," without flinching. And right now, that timeline betrays them. Because when the public compares Meghan's words to the documents, the inconsistencies scream louder than any denial ever could. But the story doesn't end here. Because once you notice the timeline cracks, you begin to see something even more unsettling. It's not just about when the babies were born. It's about who was, or wasn't, there to bring them into the world. The missing names, the absent doctors, the professionals who should have been central to the story, yet somehow vanish from the records. And that's where the next revelation lies. Because if the dates don't add up and the doctors don't appear, then what really happened inside those hospital walls? Every birth has a doctor. That's the assumption, isn't it? Someone in a white coat, gloves on, clipboard nearby, ushering new life safely into the world. And when we think of royal births, the image becomes even more official. Famed obstetricians, neatly dressed in suits, proudly signing their names on certificates that will be archived in history. So why is it that when we look at the hospital records for Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, those names are suspiciously absent? Why do the very people who should be at the center of these births appear to vanish from the paperwork? That's not just strange, it's unprecedented. Let's talk about precedent for a moment. When Princess Diana gave birth to William and Harry, the attending physicians weren't just present, they were named, photographed, and celebrated. The official documents listed their involvement. Their reputations were tied to the moment. The same happened with Kate Middleton. Her doctors appeared on the birth certificates, their signatures serving as a stamp of legitimacy. It wasn't optional. It wasn't vague. It was protocol. So when Meghan's documents show gaps where names should be, we have to ask, was this an oversight, or was it deliberate? Imagine this, a hospital birth record without the doctor's details. It's like a wedding certificate without the officiant's name, or a legal contract without signatures. It undermines the credibility of the document itself. How could something so important be missing? And more importantly, why? Because we all know hospitals are meticulous. Records aren't casual scribbles on scraps of paper. They're legal evidence. They're meant to withstand scrutiny. If these gaps exist, someone allowed them. And that raises the uncomfortable question, who benefits from erasing those details? Here's one theory. By leaving the attending doctor's name off the records, Meghan and Harry insulated themselves from accountability. After all, a doctor could be questioned. A doctor could confirm or deny the circumstances of the birth. A doctor could testify whether Meghan was ever actually in that delivery room. Without a name, there's no one to ask, no one to verify, no one to contradict the narrative. Clever, isn't it? But also dangerous. Because the absence of those details doesn't silence suspicion. It amplifies it. Now think about how this plays in the public eye. We're not talking about ordinary parents here. We're talking about a duke and duchess whose children are part of the royal bloodline. Every detail matters. Every piece of paperwork is part of a much bigger legacy. So when the doctors vanish from the records, the public isn't just confused, they're suspicious. And suspicion, once it takes root, grows fast. People begin to imagine all sorts of scenarios. Was Meghan ever in that hospital? Was it a surrogate who delivered the baby? Was the birth staged in a way that couldn't withstand medical verification? Do you see how one missing line on a certificate explodes into 100 questions? And let's not forget the hospitals themselves. These aren't small-town clinics. These are prestigious medical institutions, aware of the weight of royal births. Their staff know their handling history, which means the absence of details can't be dismissed as clerical error. It had to be intentional. Someone made the decision to leave those names off. Was it Meghan? Harry? A palace official trying to accommodate unusual requests? Whoever it was, they must have known this would come under scrutiny one day. Unless, of course, they counted on the public never seeing the records at all. This isn't the first time royal births have been shrouded in secrecy. Decades ago, Queen Elizabeth's births were shielded from cameras, details tightly controlled. But even then, medical professionals stood as witnesses. The difference now is that Meghan and Harry presented themselves as modern, transparent, authentic. They claimed to reject palace games. Yet here they are, at the center of a mystery that looks more like manipulation than honesty. Isn't that the ultimate contradiction? Picture this. In Montecito, Meghan rehearses the story line by line. She talks about her empowered birth choices. She talks about privacy. She avoids specifics. Harry nods, trying to believe that controlling the narrative will protect them. Meanwhile, somewhere across the ocean, archivists and journalists sift through documents, frowning at the empty spaces where names should be. That tension, the gap between what Meghan says and what the records show, is what makes the truth so explosive. And then there's the emotional angle. Imagine being a child who grows up one day to see that your birth certificate doesn't even list the doctor who delivered you. What message does that send? That your arrival was somehow staged? That it wasn't important enough to be properly recorded? Archie and Lilibet didn't ask for this, but those omissions cast a shadow over their very identities. And for Harry, a man already scarred by his own paternity rumors, that shadow must feel suffocating. Every missing name, every blank space, is another reminder that his family's story is built on shaky ground. So, what's the real explanation? Some claim it was simply an issue of privacy, that Meghan and Harry requested anonymity for the medical staff to protect them from media harassment. But if that were the case, why not say so? Why let the silence fester into suspicion? Because privacy doesn't erase a doctor's legal responsibility to sign off on a birth. Privacy doesn't override protocol. Privacy doesn't make names disappear from official certificates. No, this was something else. Something deliberate. And this leads us to a chilling thought. If the doctors' names are absent, then who can truly vouch for what happened in those delivery rooms? Who can confirm that Meghan was there? Who can confirm that the births unfolded as described? Without those witnesses, all we have is Meghan's word, and Meghan's word is exactly what's under question. Do you see the trap? By trying to protect themselves from scrutiny, they created the very circumstances that invite even greater doubt. The vanishing doctors are more than a missing line on a certificate. They're a crack in the foundation. They're the absence that demands explanation. And once people see that absence, they start looking closer. They start asking what else is missing. And that's when the timeline itself begins to collapse. Because the doctors aren't the only ones who vanish. The dates, too, seem to slip away from solid ground, leaving behind a trail of contradictions that no spin can fix. What do you see when you hold two documents side by side? That's the question journalists asked themselves when Archie Harrison's and Lilibet Diana's birth certificates finally surfaced. On the surface, they looked ordinary. Official stamps, typed lines, the familiar structure of a government record. But when investigators compared them with Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public timeline, the cracks began to show. Dates didn't line up. Details conflicted. Signatures seemed off. And suddenly, what should have been routine paperwork looked more like a puzzle with missing pieces. If the documents are supposed to prove the truth, why do they raise more questions than answers? Let's start with Archie. His birth certificate, issued in May 2019, should have been straightforward. Place of birth, attending physician, parental information, it's all basic. But when eagle-eyed reporters studied the form, they noticed subtle inconsistencies. The place of birth was listed as Portland Hospital in London. Nothing unusual there, except Meghan and Harry had originally suggested she wanted a home birth. Weeks before the delivery, palace briefings hinted that Meghan preferred a private, natural setting at Frogmore Cottage. Then, out of nowhere, Archie was declared born in a hospital miles away. What changed? Why the secrecy? And why didn't the palace announce the change in advance? But here's where it gets stranger. The timeline. Meghan and Harry told the world that Meghan went into labor on the morning of May 6th. Yet the certificate suggested the birth had taken place hours before the palace even admitted she was in labor. The public narrative and the official record clashed. How can you be in labor and already finished giving birth at the same time? Doesn't that sound like a carefully staged delay? A way to control the narrative before the truth emerged? And then came the signature. On royal birth certificates, the attending physician traditionally signs off, confirming they were present. Diana's certificates listed Sir George Pinker. Kate Middleton's listed Guy Thorpe Beeston and Alan Farthing. These names became part of royal history. But Archie's certificate didn't carry the same weight of tradition. It lacked the expected signature. The doctors weren't clearly identified. The omission might seem small, but in the world of royal protocol, small details scream louder than big ones. Why leave such an important line incomplete? Now let's shift to Lilibet. Born in June 2021 at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, her certificate was expected to be cleaner, less subject to palace interference since Harry and Meghan were no longer working royals. But when journalists pulled the document, they noticed inconsistencies again. The delivery details were unusually sparse. The attending physician was once more not clearly documented in the expected format. And most telling of all, some of the listed information conflicted with Meghan's own statements about her pregnancy timeline. Meghan had described her due date in interviews, but the certificate suggested a different gestation period. Was she off by weeks? Or was she once again crafting a story that didn't match the paper trail? And let's not forget the stylistic oddities. Some of the formatting on Archie's certificate didn't match standard UK birth records. Fonts seemed slightly different. Lines that were supposed to align appeared uneven. Was it a printing error? Or was it evidence of alteration? Skeptics argued the latter, pointing out that royal documents are usually pristine. Could someone have tampered with the forms after the fact, editing details to protect Meghan's version of events? And if so, who had the authority to do it? These mismatched certificates do more than confuse, they undermine credibility. Because if one line doesn't add up, people start questioning every line. Was Meghan really where she claimed to be? Were the births really attended as described? Or were the documents patched together to fit a pre-written script? That's the danger of discrepancies. They don't just cast doubt on the details, they cast doubt on the entire story. And here's where it gets emotionally devastating. Imagine growing up and learning that your birth certificate, the document that anchors your identity, doesn't match the timeline your parents told the world. Imagine the confusion, the betrayal. For Archie and Lilibet, these aren't just pieces of paper. They're the foundation of their story. And that foundation now looks shaky. Ask yourself this. If Meghan and Harry were simply victims of clerical errors, wouldn't they have rushed to clarify the situation? Wouldn't they have corrected the record? Their silence speaks volumes. Instead of explanations, there were deflections. Instead of clarifications, there was control. And in the court of public opinion, silence often looks like guilt. And here's the irony. Meghan and Harry have built their brand on authenticity, on their truth. But when the documents that should support their truth clash with their story, the brand begins to crack. Because their truth isn't the same as the truth. And once the public senses that gap, it becomes impossible to ignore. But this isn't just about mismatched certificates. Those documents are only one part of the puzzle. Because if the signatures and dates are wrong, if the details don't line up, then we have to look deeper. Who leaked the hospital records in the first place? And why now? What motivated insiders to risk exposing these contradictions? That's the next twist in this unfolding drama. Because the leak itself wasn't just a slip, it was a calculated act. And the people behind it knew exactly how explosive these documents would be once the world saw them. What happens when hospitals don't keep secrets? That's the unsettling question that rattled Buckingham Palace, Montecito, and the entire global press corps when reports surfaced that internal hospital documents tied to Meghan Markle's births had been leaked. Hospitals are supposed to be fortresses of privacy. They guard their records with the ferocity of banks protecting vaults. Patient confidentiality isn't just policy, it's law. And yet, somehow, files connected to the Sussex's children slipped into the hands of journalists. How? Why? And what exactly did they reveal that set the world ablaze? Let's begin with the basics. Hospitals are bound by strict confidentiality rules, HIPAA in the United States, data protection laws in the UK. Breaching them isn't just unethical, it's illegal. That's why the very idea that Archie Harrison's or Lilibet Diana's records made their way into the press sends shivers down the spine. It suggests one of two possibilities. Either a whistleblower deliberately risked their career and possibly their freedom to expose the truth, or someone powerful orchestrated a calculated leak from within. Which possibility sounds more believable to you? Now picture the scene. Somewhere in London or in Santa Barbara, a staff member sits hunched over a terminal, staring at Meghan Markle's file. They see dates that don't match the palace press release. They see delivery details that raise questions. They see omissions, names of doctors missing where they should have been present. And in that moment, maybe they feel a moral conflict. Do they stay silent and let the inconsistencies lie hidden forever? Or do they become the person who tips the world off to a scandal that could rewrite royal history? One click, one forwarded file, and the fuse is lit. Journalists, of course, thrive on leaks. Think of Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks. History has shown us that when secret documents surface, the public appetite for them is insatiable. And in this case, the royal angle magnifies the effect 100-fold. Royal watchers, conspiracy theorists, critics, and supporters alike devour every line of the leaked records. Because this isn't just about two children. It's about the integrity of an institution, the honesty of a couple who've claimed to fight for truth, and the possibility that the most private moments of their lives may have been staged. But here's where things get even more intriguing. The leak didn't come all at once. It was a drip, not a flood. A snippet here, a detail there. Enough to spark conversation, but not enough to satisfy it. And with every new piece of information, the contradictions deepened. The official announcements from Meghan and Harry no longer aligned neatly with what the records suggested. The palace statements, already unusual in their secrecy, looked even more suspicious in hindsight. Doesn't it always seem like the cover-up causes more damage than the truth itself? Now think about the ripple effects inside the hospital. Administrators scrambling, investigators quietly interviewing staff, security protocols being tightened overnight. Imagine being a nurse or technician on shift during Meghan's alleged delivery and suddenly realizing the world might come knocking on your door. The fear, the paranoia. Who leaked it? Was it a colleague? A superior? Or worse? Was it someone higher up, someone connected to the palace itself, who wanted these contradictions to come to light at just the right moment? And then comes the Sussex reaction. Meghan, fiercely protective of her privacy, panics at the thought of medical records in the hands of the press. Harry, haunted by a lifetime of media intrusion, reportedly furious, pacing rooms, cursing under his breath about betrayal. Do you see the irony? They fled the UK claiming they wanted freedom from the press, yet here in California, the shadow of exposure follows them. No matter where they run, the documents chase them down. The leak also throws fuel onto existing conspiracy theories. For years, critics accused Meghan of staging her pregnancies, pointing to her fluctuating baby bump and carefully managed appearances. Supporters called it cruel, dismissing it as tabloid nonsense. But now, with records in the press that don't match Meghan's timeline, the whispers gain credibility. What was once dismissed as rumor begins to look like evidence. Isn't it astonishing how fast perception can change when documents enter the picture? And yet, the leak itself becomes part of the drama. Was it ethical? Should the press even report on confidential medical files? Supporters of Meghan and Harry cry foul, insisting this is an unforgivable invasion of privacy. But critics argue that when inconsistencies strike at the heart of royal succession and public trust, the story transcends privacy. Which side do you fall on? Should privacy shield public figures even when their narratives collapse under the weight of evidence? Here's another angle to consider. Timing. Why did the records leak now, years after Archie's birth and months after Lilibet's? Could it be coincidence? Or was it deliberate, strategically released at a moment when Meghan and Harry were riding high in media deals, book releases, and Netflix specials? Bringing them down when they were at their peak of influence would have the greatest impact, wouldn't it? Doesn't that sound less like chance and more like chess? The hospital leak isn't just about what was revealed, it's about what it triggered. Because once the public saw the documents, the appetite for more exploded. Journalists began hunting down staff, looking for nurses or orderlies willing to talk. The internet lit up with speculation, memes, threads dissecting every line of the paperwork. And Meghan and Harry, instead of quelling the storm with a straightforward explanation, retreated into silence. And silence, in moments like these, is never neutral. It sounds like guilt. It looks like panic. It feels like confirmation. But here's the kicker. The leak didn't just expose inconsistencies in the paperwork. It hinted at something far bigger. Because along with the documents came whispers, staff who claimed to have been there, or not been there, on the day of the births. Testimonies, accounts, rumors. And those voices didn't align with Meghan's version of events either. The paperwork was damning. But the staff stories? They were explosive. If walls could talk, what would they say? That's the chilling question raised once whispers began circulating from inside the very hospitals where Archie and Lilibet were supposedly born. Documents alone are powerful, but when staff members, people who claim to have been there, start speaking, the story takes on an entirely different weight. Because paperwork can be explained away as clerical error. Dates can be chalked up to mistakes. But when nurses, attendants, and hospital staff allegedly contradict the official story, it stops being a matter of paperwork. It becomes a matter of testimony. And testimony carries a human truth that is far harder to dismiss. Let's paint the picture. In London, at Portland Hospital, Archie's birth was said to have been managed discreetly, away from the traditional Lindo wing spectacle. Meghan, we were told, wanted privacy. She wanted control. No staged photo op on the hospital steps. No flashing bulbs capturing her at her most vulnerable. But behind closed doors, staff members reportedly murmured that the birth didn't unfold as described. Some claim Meghan was barely seen on site. Others suggested the timeline didn't match her presence at all. Imagine working a shift at a hospital where the world believes a royal baby is being delivered, yet no one can clearly recall seeing the mother in question. Doesn't that sound bizarre? Then there's Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, the setting for Lilibet's birth. By then, Meghan and Harry had escaped the palace and settled into their new American life. Here, too, the narrative was polished. Meghan gave birth on June 4, 2021, with Harry by her side, both glowing with joy. The announcement was crafted perfectly. Gratitude to the hospital staff, a nod to Diana, the symbolic naming of their daughter. But insiders whispered something different. Some staff reportedly said Meghan wasn't seen entering the hospital under her own name. Others noted unusual levels of secrecy surrounding the delivery, with entire wings cleared and staff sworn to silence. Of course, VIP births come with high security. But this wasn't just security, it felt like obfuscation. And when people feel they're being asked to cover something up, they talk. Now, let's step into the psychology of these whispers. Why would staff speak out at all, knowing the risks? Perhaps guilt. Perhaps resentment at being used as props in a carefully staged story. Or perhaps loyalty to the truth. In any case, the effect is devastating for Meghan and Harry. Because even if 1% of these testimonies hold weight, they cast shadows that can never be fully erased. And shadows, once they cling to a narrative, are nearly impossible to shake. Think about the contradictions. Staff reportedly claimed that certain rooms were prepared at odd times, inconsistent with the supposed labor schedule. Others noted discrepancies in the medical staff roster. people who were said to be present, yet whose shifts didn't align. These details might sound small, but in the world of investigative journalism, small cracks can shatter entire facades. How many scandals have been unraveled because someone noticed a single timestamp out of place? A single signature missing? The same pattern repeats here. The whispers may seem trivial on their own, but together they form a chorus of doubt. And let's not ignore the surrogacy theory. For years, critics have alleged that Meghan used a surrogate for one or both children. Tabloids pointed to the changing shape of her bump, the unusual secrecy around delivery, and the lack of photographic proof. These whispers from hospital staff poured gasoline on that fire. Some claimed Meghan never appeared visibly pregnant in the hospital. Others hinted at behind-the-scenes arrangements, where another woman may have been involved. These are explosive allegations, ones that Meghan and Harry have furiously denied. But once the words are spoken, they can't be unsaid. And for a public already primed to doubt, the idea doesn't vanish, it grows. What makes this worse is how Meghan and Harry's own actions seem to validate suspicion. By refusing to release straightforward details, by hiding from the press, by spinning stories that don't align with documents, they invite doubt. Imagine if Kate Middleton had chosen not to appear outside the Lindo wing after her children's births. Imagine if Diana had hidden William's birth in secrecy. The speculation would have been unbearable. Meghan chose secrecy, but secrecy in the royal sphere always looks like scandal. It's the nature of the game. And once staff whispers filter out, secrecy transforms into suspicion, and suspicion transforms into scandal. Now let's add the emotional layer. For the hospital workers who did see something, or didn't see what they expected, the cognitive dissonance must have been intense. Do they speak out and risk lawsuits? Do they stay silent and carry the burden of complicity? And for those who did whisper to the press, imagine the fear of retaliation. A hospital career destroyed, a lawsuit filed, reputations ruined. And yet, the fact that whispers emerged at all suggests the inconsistencies were too big to keep contained. Doesn't it always seem like the truth finds a way to slip out, no matter how tightly it's sealed? And here's where the story takes its cruelest turn. Because those whispers didn't stay whispers for long. They ignited. Blogs, tabloids, YouTube channels. Everyone seized on the alleged testimonies. They became fuel for conspiracy theories, evidence for skeptics, and torment for Meghan and Harry. And once again, the couple stayed silent. But silence, in the face of mounting testimonies, no longer looks like dignity. It looks like fear. It looks like panic. And panic is exactly what their critics wanted the world to see. But here's the question no one expected. If surrogacy really did play a role, why would Meghan and Harry go to such extraordinary lengths to hide it? Why not simply admit the truth? After all, surrogacy isn't scandalous in itself. It's legal, common, and increasingly accepted. So what made it so taboo in this case? The answer may lie not in Meghan's choices, but in royal tradition itself. Because if the Sussexes had admitted to surrogacy, they would have collided with centuries of royal law and succession protocol. And that collision might explain why secrecy felt like their only option. Could it all have been staged? That's the chilling question at the heart of the surrogacy theories that have swirled around Meghan Markle from the moment she announced her first pregnancy. Let's be clear, surrogacy is not, in itself, a scandal. It's a path to parenthood for countless families across the world. But in the context of the British monarchy, an institution built on bloodlines, legitimacy, and centuries of tradition, it becomes something far more explosive. And when you start to connect the dots between Meghan's unusual secrecy, the missing doctors, and the mismatched paperwork, the picture that emerges looks less like coincidence and more like choreography. Was Meghan ever truly pregnant? Or was the entire narrative carefully staged to protect appearances? Let's rewind to late 2018. Meghan steps out in Sydney, hand on her stomach, glowing as headlines blare. The Duchess is expecting. But skeptics immediately notice something odd. The timing feels orchestrated. The announcement dropped precisely at the start of a high-profile royal tour. Convenient, isn't it? Meghan knows the cameras will be on her daily, her figure scrutinized in every outfit. What better way to cement the narrative than to reveal a pregnancy right before the biggest spotlight of her early royal life? But here's the catch. As the weeks progress, her bump seems to defy biology. Some days it looks larger, other days smaller. In some clips, it even appears to shift unnaturally as she bends down. Supporters dismissed this as cruel gossip, but to critics, it looked like stagecraft. And then there's the wardrobe. Meghan, a woman celebrated for her impeccable style, made curious choices during her pregnancies. Flowing coats in warm weather, oddly placed belts above the bump. Rarely, if ever, did she wear the kind of form-fitting maternity clothes that Kate or Diana had chosen in the past. Some argued it was simply her fashion preference. Others whispered it was because she had something to hide, perhaps a prosthetic bump, or as conspiracy theorists labeled it, a moon bump. Ask yourself this. If you wanted to disguise a surrogate arrangement, wouldn't you manage your public image exactly this way? Always hinting at a pregnancy, but never letting the world see it unfiltered. By the time Archie was born, those suspicions had only grown. Meghan's refusal to follow royal tradition. Eschewing the iconic Lindo wing photo op, controlling the announcement timing, even delaying news of labor until after Archie had supposedly already arrived, fed the narrative that something wasn't right. If Meghan had truly wanted privacy, fine. But privacy and secrecy are not the same thing. Privacy asks for space. Secrecy manipulates perception. And it was secrecy that defined Archie's arrival. Doesn't that distinction matter? Now, fast forward to Lilibet. By this point, Meghan and Harry had left royal duties behind. They were living in California, no longer bound by palace protocols. Surely this would have been the perfect opportunity for Meghan to silence critics once and for all with a transparent, documented birth. But what happened instead? More secrecy, more sparse details, more inconsistencies. The Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital certificate looked incomplete, lacking the kind of clarity expected for a high-profile delivery. And once again, Meghan avoided the public eye during the crucial weeks. No candid photos, no unfiltered appearances, just polished press releases and carefully chosen portraits long after the fact. It felt less like transparency and more like another layer of staging. But why? Why would surrogacy be hidden at all? The answer lies in royal tradition. Under UK succession law, a child born through surrogacy is not automatically considered of the body of the royal parent unless legally adopted and specifically legitimized. That phrase, of the body, has been critical for centuries. It's not just biology. It's the perception of direct, natural lineage. In other words, if Meghan had used a surrogate and admitted it, Archie's and Lilibet's places in the royal line might have been challenged. Do you see how high the stakes suddenly become? This isn't just about parenting choices. It's about monarchy, inheritance, titles, and legitimacy. Now imagine Harry in this scenario. A man haunted his entire life by rumors that he isn't Prince Charles's son, now facing the possibility that his own children's legitimacy could be questioned. The irony is almost cruel. He once lived under whispers that undermined his royal bloodline. Now those whispers circle his children. For Harry, admitting to surrogacy might feel like confirming the very rumors that destroyed his own peace of mind. Wouldn't you fight to protect your kids from that same fate, even if it meant constructing a facade? And let's not underestimate Meghan's role. Meghan has always been image-savvy. She understands branding. She knows perception is reality. By staging the optics of pregnancy, appearing with bumps, posing for carefully controlled photos, she built a narrative strong enough to shield the truth, if the truth was indeed surrogacy. Because in the end, the public doesn't witness births. They witness appearances. And appearances can be staged with astonishing precision. Of course, defenders argue that Meghan faced extraordinary scrutiny and made choices purely for her own comfort and privacy. They say it's cruel to question a woman's pregnancy. And there's validity in that argument. Until the paperwork, the testimonies, and the timelines all begin to unravel. When too many details don't add up, the question is no longer cruel curiosity. It becomes investigative necessity. Because if the monarchy itself rests on these children's legitimacy, then inconsistencies aren't just tabloid fodder. They're matters of constitutional significance. Think of the irony here. Meghan and Harry position themselves as truth-tellers, the couple who dared to speak out against royal lies. And yet, in the very heart of their own story, the possibility emerges that they've built their narrative on deception. Surrogacy itself wouldn't have been scandalous. Hiding it, manipulating it, constructing false timelines, that's what makes it scandalous. It's not the choice. It's the cover-up. And that cover-up, if it exists, leads us to a bigger question. Why was it necessary at all? Because beyond personal image, beyond Harry's fears, lies a centuries-old institution that demands children of the crown be born in a particular way. The monarchy isn't modern. It's bound by archaic rules, traditions, and expectations. And if Meghan had admitted to using a surrogate, she wouldn't just have faced media gossip. She would have collided head-on with royal law. And that collision, between modern choice and ancient tradition, might be the key to why secrecy felt like their only option. Why would a royal lie about a birth? That's the question that hovers like smoke over this entire saga. To most families, the method of a child's arrival is private, personal, and no one else's business. But in the British monarchy, births are never just about family. They are about continuity, legitimacy, and the survival of the institution itself. Every royal birth is a transaction between tradition and public trust. And when it comes to Archie and Lilibet, the secrecy, the inconsistencies, and the omissions suggest that the Sussexes may have chosen deception over disclosure. But why? What could be so dangerous about the truth that it had to be hidden at all costs? Let's go back to the roots of royal protocol. For centuries, the monarchy has been obsessed with ensuring the legitimacy of its heirs. In medieval times, noble women gave birth in the presence of witnesses, sometimes half a dozen people crowded into chambers, not because anyone doubted the baby was real, but because succession crises destroyed kingdoms. Eyewitnesses guaranteed that the future monarch was truly of the body of the queen. That tradition lingered in different forms for generations. Even as late as the 20th century, births of royals were accompanied by official witnesses and promptly documented with impeccable detail. Diana's births, Kate's births, even the Queen's, each carried the stamp of official verification. It wasn't optional. It was survival. Now, compare that with Meghan. She defied nearly every expectation. No Lindo wing appearance. No clear documentation. No prompt announcement of labor. And perhaps most controversially, no trusted royal physician visibly attached to the births. To her, it may have been about privacy and autonomy. But to the monarchy, it looked like rebellion. And to the public, it looked like secrecy. And secrecy in the royal context almost always invites scandal. Doesn't it strike you as strange that at the very moment when transparency mattered most, Meghan clamped down hardest? So what's the motive? Let's explore the possibilities. First, there's the surrogacy angle. As discussed earlier, UK succession law still uses archaic wording like heirs of the body. That phrase means a child must be born from the physical body of the royal parent to be recognized as a legitimate heir to the throne. If Meghan had admitted to using a surrogate, Archie and Lilibet's claims to royal titles, and even their places in the line of succession, could have been questioned. That's not a minor risk. That's a constitutional earthquake. Do you see why, if surrogacy were involved, the Sussexes might have felt cornered into secrecy? Another motive, control. Meghan and Harry have long complained that palace officials leaked and twisted their stories. By keeping the births tightly under wraps, they seized control of the narrative. They dictated when the announcement came, how it was worded, and what images were released. To them, this may have felt empowering. But to the public, it looked manipulative. Because when you deviate from royal tradition, people ask why. And when the why isn't answered, they invent answers. That's the cruel reality of perception. And then there's the financial motive. Meghan and Harry knew their brand rested heavily on their image as young, relatable parents forging their own path. They also knew that the first photos of Archie and Lilibet were worth millions on the open market. Privacy becomes a commodity when your image is your business. Could it be that secrecy wasn't just about privacy, but about maximizing the financial and branding impact of their children's introductions? If so, then every inconsistency, every delay, becomes less about fear and more about strategy. Doesn't that possibility make the entire narrative feel colder, more transactional? But the most haunting motive may be psychological. For Harry, the wounds of his own paternity rumors never healed. Decades of tabloids speculating that he was James Hewitt's son left scars deeper than anyone could measure. The last thing he wanted was for his children to live under similar whispers. And yet, by refusing transparency, he may have guaranteed the very outcome he feared. Isn't that the cruelest irony? In trying to protect them, he may have condemned them to the same fate. Now, let's not ignore the institution itself. The monarchy thrives on appearances. It values tradition over truth, perception over reality. Could palace officials have played a role in shaping, editing, or even fabricating elements of the story? Absolutely. Remember, the palace initially released conflicting details about Meghan's labor and Archie's birth. That's not sloppy, it's strategic. It suggests competing factions within the institution itself. Meghan and Harry may not have been the only ones hiding something. The monarchy may have been complicit, desperate to maintain its image while accommodating the couple's unusual demands. Doesn't that make the cover-up even more tangled? But here's where the story gets darker. Because if secrecy was motivated by protocol, by control, or by fear, then there must also be a legal element. Royal law isn't flexible. It doesn't bend easily to modern choices. And buried deep within that archaic framework is a clause so obscure, so overlooked, that it may explain everything. A clause that makes surrogacy not just controversial, but almost impossible to admit. And it is that clause, hidden in the dusty legal traditions of monarchy, that turns secrecy from a choice into an inevitability. Who controls the story, controls the truth. That's not just a catchy phrase. It's the engine that drives the entire media machine, and no one understood that better than Meghan Markle. From the very beginning, she and Harry insisted they wanted to break free from the monarchy's stranglehold on image. They said they were tired of the lies, tired of the manipulation. But here's the irony. In their desperation to seize control of the narrative, they may have built a media strategy so airtight, so carefully timed, that it ended up looking less like honesty and more like stage management. And when leaks began to puncture that strategy, the contradictions between Meghan's timeline and the hospital records became impossible to ignore. Let's zoom in on how timing became their weapon. In the royal family, announcements follow ritual. Pregnancy news typically comes later, when the risk of miscarriage is lower, and it's handled by palace officials with a formal statement. Meghan, however, announced at 12 weeks, right at the start of a glamorous Australian tour. The timing was suspiciously perfect. Think about it. Every day of that trip, she knew cameras would capture her cradling her bump. Headlines would gush over her royal glow, and the story of the modern fairy tale would cement itself in public imagination. That wasn't coincidence. That was choreography. Do you see how effective timing can shape belief? But timing works both ways. Consider Archie's birth. The palace announced Meghan had gone into labor hours after she'd already delivered. Hours. By the time the world was told she was experiencing contractions, Archie was already swaddled in a blanket. Why the delay? Was it about security? Privacy? Or was it about polishing the narrative, ensuring every detail was fed to the public in a controlled sequence? This wasn't a mistake, it was a tactic. And tactics always raise suspicion. Because when the story is shaped too neatly, people start wondering what's being hidden. And then came the Oprah interview, another masterpiece of timing. Dropped at the height of their split from the royal family, it gave Meghan the platform to control her story globally. She revealed pain, racism, isolation. She revealed a palace unwilling to protect her. But notice what she didn't reveal. Specific details about Archie's birth, about the doctors, about the inconsistencies in the records. She offered emotion, not evidence. Pathos, not proof. And because the interview aired at a moment of peak public sympathy, many overlooked the omissions. Clever, isn't it? Timing again turned the tide. Now let's talk about the media's role in this. Meghan and Harry didn't just manage their own announcements. They manipulated the press cycle itself. By feeding certain outlets small morsels while withholding full details, they kept the story alive longer. Think of it like episodes of a TV show. Drop one cliffhanger now, another a few weeks later, and keep the audience hooked. But the danger with episodic storytelling is that eventually the missing pieces pile up. And when leaks from hospitals surfaced, journalists suddenly had material Meghan couldn't spin. Documents don't obey PR cycles. They reveal facts, and facts don't always align with fairy tales. Ask yourself this. Have you ever noticed how Meghan often chose to appear in public at key cultural moments, making sure her bump was photographed just when public interest was spiking? Valentine's Day, International Women's Day, royal tours. Those appearances weren't random. They were strategic. It's the oldest trick in media manipulation. Give the audience something to focus on, so they don't notice what you're not showing them. A glowing bump distracts from missing doctors. A symbolic coat hides timeline gaps. Do you see the sleight of hand? But here's the turning point. The strategy worked brilliantly until the leaks. When the documents emerged, showing contradictions in delivery dates, missing signatures, and absent physicians, the entire media management strategy unraveled. Because once reality contradicts the story, no amount of timing or spin can cover it up. And in fact, the attempt to spin only makes the contradictions louder. It's like pulling a thread on a sweater. The harder you try to tuck it back in, the faster it unravels. And let's not ignore the emotional cost. For Harry, timing wasn't just about strategy, it was about survival. He'd grown up watching his mother manipulated by the press, then hounded to her death. He'd lived through his own life being twisted into headlines he couldn't control. So of course he embraced Meghan's obsession with managing the narrative. It gave him a sense of safety. But in chasing control, they may have created a cage of their own making. Because every secret, every delayed announcement, every staged moment becomes a point of suspicion. And once suspicion takes root, it's impossible to kill. The irony is painful. Meghan and Harry set out to expose the palace's media manipulation, yet they fell into the same trap themselves, crafting their own narrative, choosing their own timing, and ultimately being undone by the very game they swore they'd escaped. The palace has always used timing to its advantage, delaying announcements, burying bad news, spotlighting good news. Meghan simply played the same playbook. But when you rebel against the monarchy while mimicking its tricks, doesn't that make your rebellion look hollow? But the timing story doesn't end with press releases or hospital leaks. Because the moment Meghan and Harry's timeline began to collapse, another storm was already brewing. Another scandal, seemingly unrelated, was crashing into the headlines. And when these two stories collided, the fallout was far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. Because Meghan and Harry's shaky timeline didn't just unravel on its own, it collided head-on with another royal controversy already simmering in the background. How does a man haunted by his own parentage cope with his children's? That's the agonizing question at the heart of Prince Harry's struggle, and it's one that throws a shadow over every twist in this story. For decades, Harry lived under the weight of rumors that Prince Charles wasn't his real father. Tabloids splashed photos of James Hewitt next to Harry's freckled face, pointing to the red hair as if it were proof of betrayal. Imagine growing up with that noise echoing around you. Every headline, every whisper, every cruel joke at Eton or Sandhurst, questioning not just who your father was, but whether you truly belonged to the royal family at all. Now imagine stepping into fatherhood with that scar still raw, only to face the possibility that your own children might grow up under the same cloud of doubt. Doesn't that feel like a curse repeating itself? Harry's relationship with identity has always been fragile. He was the spare, the backup to William's heir. His role was ill-defined, his existence overshadowed by duty he would never fully inherit. Add to that the endless speculation about his bloodline, and you have a young man caught between belonging and exclusion. Every time a tabloid suggested he was Hewitt's son, it wasn't just gossip, it was an assault on his very right to exist as a Windsor. And now, with Archie and Lilibet, those same dynamics resurface. When hospital records don't align, when certificates contradict, when whispers of surrogacy emerge, the irony is unbearable. Harry, who once wept over doubts about his own paternity, now watches as similar doubts circle his children. Think of the psychological toll. A father's role is to protect, to shield. But how do you protect your children from something you couldn't escape yourself? How do you shield them from whispers when the whispers come wrapped in documents, leaks, and testimony? For Harry, every inconsistency in Meghan's timeline must feel like déjà vu, a cruel echo of the life he tried to leave behind. The fear isn't just about public opinion. It's about legacy. Because the question of identity in the royal family isn't just personal, it's constitutional. And that means his children's very place in the line of succession could be challenged. Isn't it tragic that Harry, of all people, must carry that burden? Let's not forget the emotional backdrop. Harry has always idolized his mother, Diana. He saw how she was treated by the palace, how she was betrayed by the press. He believed she was silenced, manipulated, perhaps even sacrificed. So when Meghan came under fire, Harry's protective instincts went into overdrive. But here's the paradox. By trying to protect Meghan and the children through secrecy, he may have created the very conditions that breed suspicion. It's a cruel twist. The harder he tries to shield his family, the more the world questions their story. And Meghan's role in this dynamic is just as important. She, too, has struggled with identity. Biracial, divorced, American, an actress stepping into the world's most rigid institution. She knows what it means to be doubted, to be reduced to labels. So together, she and Harry built a fortress of narrative, controlling every detail they could. But fortresses have cracks, and the pressure of those cracks is now breaking through. The inconsistencies aren't just logistical, they're symbolic. They mirror the very insecurities Harry has carried since childhood. Isn't it almost poetic? The man accused of not truly belonging to the House of Windsor, now raising children whose belonging is questioned in eerily similar ways. Ask yourself this. What happens to a child who grows up knowing their father's legitimacy was doubted, and now their own is too? What kind of generational wound does that create? For Archie and Lilibet, the hospital leaks aren't just tabloid fodder. They're the seeds of an identity crisis that could follow them for life. And for Harry, watching that unfold must feel like reliving his own trauma on repeat. The weight of it is crushing. No wonder he lashes out at the press. No wonder he retreats into silence when contradictions arise. Silence feels safer than facing ghosts that have haunted him since birth. And yet, there's another layer. The monarchy itself thrives on these contradictions. Whispers about bloodlines, questions of legitimacy. They fuel intrigue, keep the royals in the headlines, remind the world of their precarious humanity. Harry knows this game. He's seen it played on his mother, on himself. And now, whether he admits it or not, it's being played on his children. He's not just fighting for privacy. He's fighting against an institution that has always weaponized rumor as a tool of control. But in fighting that war, has he lost sight of the one thing he wanted most? To give his children peace? And here's the bitterest irony of all. Harry left the monarchy to escape its suffocating traditions, yet those traditions follow him. He fled to America for freedom, yet leaks from an American hospital mirror the leaks he thought he'd left behind in Britain. He thought he could outrun the whispers, but they've only grown louder. And now, as his children's identities are questioned, the circle is complete. The curse has repeated. The sins of one generation have bled into the next. But if you think this is where the story ends, Harry tormented, Meghan defiant, the children caught in between, you're mistaken. Because just as the Sussexes were grappling with their private crisis, the public was reacting in ways that no one could control. And once the internet got hold of the hospital leaks, the story took on a life of its own. Once the documents leaked, the internet exploded. That's not an exaggeration. It's the only way to describe the tidal wave of reaction that engulfed Meghan and Harry after the hospital inconsistencies hit the press. Within hours, hashtags began trending worldwide. Screenshots of the mismatched certificates went viral on Twitter. Reddit threads dissected every line of the documents like they were clues in a crime scene. YouTube creators churned out hour-long exposés. TikTok videos compared Meghan's public bump photos to the supposed birth dates, overlaying dramatic music and captions like, "Do you see it now?" The Sussex story was no longer in their hands. It belonged to the crowd. And when the crowd takes over, things spiral fast. Let's break down the online battlefield. On one side, you had diehard Sussex supporters. They cried invasion of privacy. They argued that Meghan was being unfairly scrutinized in ways Kate never was. They claimed the leaks were part of a smear campaign orchestrated by the palace to punish Meghan and Harry for leaving. Their hashtags, #Leave Meghan alone, #Sussex Strong, tried to drown out the noise. But on the other side, critics pounced. They pointed to every inconsistency as proof of deception. They dug up old footage of Meghan's fluctuating bump. They reposted interviews where she avoided specifics. They shouted that the documents confirmed what they'd suspected all along, that the pregnancies were staged, the paperwork manipulated, the children's identities cloaked in secrecy. And then there were the memes. Oh, the memes. Social media thrives on humor, even in scandal, and this was no exception. Photoshop edits of Meghan holding detachable bumps. Fake, wanted posters of missing doctors. Comparisons between Archie's certificate and famous forged documents from history. It was cruel, biting, but undeniably effective. Memes spread faster than facts, embedding the idea of deception into the cultural consciousness. You can deny rumors. You can issue statements. But how do you fight memes that turn your alleged lies into punchlines? Now let's talk about the emotional spikes. Online debates weren't just about paperwork. They were about trust, betrayal, and identity. For many, Meghan symbolized modern independence, a woman who stood up to an archaic institution. To see her credibility questioned cut deep. Was she really the truth-teller she claimed to be? Or had she played the public for sympathy while hiding her own deception? For Harry, once branded the honest rebel prince, the leaks painted him as either complicit or naive. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Fans who once defended them now felt duped. And betrayal, once felt, is hard to reverse. What about the mainstream press? Newspapers across the globe smelled blood. Even outlets once sympathetic to the Sussexes began running cautious but cutting headlines. Birth records raised questions over Sussex narrative. Op-eds debated whether Meghan's privacy claims had always been a cover for secrecy. Late-night talk shows, never missing a chance for irony, poked fun at the royal mystery babies. When mainstream media joins the online chorus, the story reaches saturation. At that point, silence from Meghan and Harry isn't interpreted as dignity. It's read as confirmation. Doesn't silence always feel like an answer when people are desperate for one? But here's where things get darker. Online communities don't stop at speculation. They dig. Amateur sleuths began hunting through archives, comparing Meghan's appearances with hospital schedules, scrutinizing every inconsistency they could find. Some even claimed to identify gaps in security footage from Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. Were these real findings, or just conspiracy spirals? Hard to say. But the sheer intensity of the online hunt turned speculation into obsession. And obsession has power. Once thousands of people crowdsource a mystery, every inconsistency feels like evidence, every unanswered question like proof of guilt. And the Sussexes? Their carefully crafted brand of authenticity took hit after hit. Meghan had built her public persona on the Oprah interview's emotional bombshells. Her pain, her suffering, her truth. But her truth began to sound hollow when the truth on paper didn't align. Fans started asking hard questions. If Meghan lied about the birth timeline, what else had she exaggerated? If Harry let this deception stand, was he truly the victim of palace cruelty, or a willing participant in his own narrative manipulation? The cracks spread quickly. A brand built on honesty cannot survive the perception of lies. And yet, amid the firestorm, one voice rose louder than the rest. A journalist, an investigative bulldog with nothing to lose, claimed to have found something far more damning than mismatched paperwork. The hospital leak had opened the door, but this journalist claimed to have walked right through it, uncovering hidden details that even the online sleuths had missed.